We are beginning now our next series in our symposium, and I'm honored to welcome Rabbi Allan Kensky to BJVE. Rabbi Kensky is the Rabbi Emeritus at Beth Hillel Congregation B'nai Emunah in Wilmette, and this is his first time teaching here for us, and we're glad to have you, Rabbi Kensky. Rabbi Kensky is going to be teaching today and then next Tuesday also about the book of Ecclesiastes, and this is very timely because Sukkot begins tomorrow evening, and Ecclesiastes, or Kohelet in the Hebrew, is the book that is read during Sukkot. So it's a very timely lesson. So Rabbi Kensky, let's welcome him.
Thank you, Rabbi Stoller. It's wonderful to be here. I've heard wonderful things about this group that you've been studying for a long time, that you really enjoy studying and learning together. And it's not too late to wish everybody a Shana Tova, very good and healthy and happy 5775. So we are going to study the book of Ecclesiastes. Do you know the other name? Kohelet. Okay, so I'm going to just explain a little bit about the name. The Hebrew name, comes from the first line of the book, and actually very often Hebrew names of biblical books are found right in the first line. You can remember that from the Torah. Bereshit, in the beginning, Shmot, Vayikra, Bamidbar, Devarim, and also, not always, but very often, you will find the name of the book the very first line. And here it's given as the name of the author. However, this is an unusual name. People are not named Kohelet. Not then and not now. So let me write it down in Hebrew letters as well as in English. Script and in block letters, Kohelet. And there's a word in Kohelet, or in this name, and namely that word is kahal. Which means a congregation. As you know, as in Kehillah, very often kahal, a congregation, a community. So the word Kohelet is it's really a strange formulation, but it might mean the convener, the one who brings the congregation together. Some suggest it's preacher. Less likely, but of course the head of the congregation will often preach. Will be the preacher. And of course, in Greek, the word for congregation is ecclesia. Hence, Ecclesiastes. It's exactly the same as Kohelet. And that was the ancient Greek name for the book. Kohelet, Ecclesiastes. Let's do it together. I always feel a little green. That's okay. So in the very first line of the book, it says, the words of Kohelet, the son of David, king in Jerusalem. Divrei Kohelet ben David, melech b'Yerushalayim. So because of that, there was a tradition that said the author of the book is King Solomon. Now, it doesn't say the words of Solomon. It says the words of Kohelet. Which son of David was king over Jerusalem? Solomon. So maybe this is a name for Solomon. So the tradition grew that Solomon was the author of the book of Kohelet, which probably was one of the reasons that it was then incorporated in the Bible, because of the attribution of Solomonic authorship. Do any of you know any other books of the Bible that are attributed to Solomon? Song of Songs. Shir Hashirim Asher Lishlomo. The Song of Songs which is unto Solomon. And sometimes the title is called the Song of Solomon. Any of you know another book? Proverbs. Mishlei Shlomo, right in the opening line, the Proverbs of Solomon. Now, biblical scholars will tell us these books were probably not written by Solomon, but rather his name was just given or attached to these books because of the great tradition of the wisdom of Solomon. That when Solomon was king, you remember when he was anointed king, shortly thereafter, God appeared to him in a dream. And God said, Solomon, what would you like? I will give it to you. And Solomon said, I would like wisdom. And God gave him wisdom in spades. And so the tradition grew, and then also in the book of Kings, it said that Solomon composed many parables. The Queen of Sheba came to Solomon because of his great wisdom. That's the famous trial, when two mothers, would-be mothers, brought their child, and Solomon made a very Solomonic decision. Because of that, later books of the Bible that fall into the category of wisdom literature were attributed to Solomon. But as I say, modern Bible scholars will tell us these books were not written by Solomon. Perhaps a little section, a little part of each of these books was written by Solomon, but essentially they were not written by him. And but alongside this tradition that Solomon was the author, we have another tradition that actually explains the sequence of the three books that Solomon composed. The Song of Songs, Proverbs, and then Kohelet, Ecclesiastes. That he composed the Song of Songs when he was a young man. It's about love, right? Love and song, etc., composed when Solomon was young. Proverbs was composed when Solomon was middle-aged and filled with practical wisdom. And Kohelet, Ecclesiastes, was composed when he was an old man and somewhat more skeptical, cynical perhaps, embittered perhaps, than he was before. And that led to his writing of the book of Kohelet. Now, it's a very interesting midrash, but I, and I'm sure you too, know that there are a lot of young people who are cynical, a lot of older people who are idealistic and filled with love. And so there are many exceptions to that, but it's an interesting midrash that sees all three works as the work of one author, of Solomon, but reflective of different stages in his life. I'm going to pause here if there are some questions, anything I've said or anything related, please.
Do we know when this was written? When this was included in canon?
Good. When was the book written, and when was it included in the canon, in the biblical canon, which is another question in and of itself. Now, the book that I use to study Kohelet with, I think it's the best there is on Kohelet, is a book by Robert Gordis, Kohelet, the Man and His World. Robert Gordis was a very well-known, very famous conservative rabbi, both a congregational rabbi and a scholar. And he taught at the Jewish Theological Seminary for many years. And I had the privilege of studying the book of Kohelet with him. And of course, that left a lasting imprint on me. And his book on Kohelet is really, I think, the best. Of course, in his introduction, he addresses these questions. When was the book written? Well, he suggests a date of between about 290 BCE and 250 BCE. And those would be the dates. And could anyone tell me anything about this period? Remember anything that occurred around that time? The Maccabees are later. The Maccabees are about 167 BCE. So it's about 100 or so years before the Maccabees. But who would be, what culture would have been dominant at the time? Greek. Alexander the Great conquered Jerusalem, or entered Jerusalem. It was actually a peaceful entry in the year 332 BCE. And then the influence of Greek culture spread very rapidly through Judea. So clearly the author of Kohelet would have been influenced by Greek ideas. And other clues, there aren't, the main clues that somebody would look at would be linguistic. And the Hebrew of the book, the Hebrew of the book of Kohelet seems to be an intermediate Hebrew between the quote, classical biblical Hebrew and later Mishnaic, rabbinic Hebrew. And it also shows some Aramaic influences and a couple of Persian words. So that means that it's considerably after, or certainly no earlier than, the time that Persia was the dominant country in that area. So these are some of the theories about Kohelet. None of them are written in stone, but it's probably, certainly it doesn't date to the time of Solomon, which is about 900 to 1000 BCE. So it's nowhere near the time of Solomon, considerably later. And the question of the canon, meaning why is the book of Kohelet in the Bible? Why did it make it into the Bible? We're going to study the book, and we'll look at some of the major themes and points of the book. And at times we're going to find lots of serious doubts, questions about ideas that we think are normative or would be normative in Judaism. So there's many reasons to say, maybe this should not be in the Bible. So what do you think? Well, the tradition of Solomonic authorship didn't hurt, right? It didn't hurt. If people thought it was written by Solomon, even if it were not written by Solomon, if people thought it was written by Solomon, well, that's a good reason that it would be in the Bible. The other reason, we'll take a look at it in a few moments, is that at the very end of the book, there are some very pious lines. And those who canonized the Bible thought that, they made the book kosher. As simple as that. These lines made the book kosher. The problem, I'll show it to you in just a moment, probably those lines were the work of an editor, not the work of the author of the book. And you can see that very simply. We'll do that right now. So you open the book. Do you all have the same Bible or different Bibles? Some have different, some have the same.
Some are different.
Why don't somebody give a
1765.
1765.
What chapter?
So we're looking at the very beginning, chapter 1, verse 1.
1440.
Okay, in the Brown Bible, 1765.
In the blue one,
1784.
Brown.
Different editions. Okay, but everyone, the first line, first verse in the book of Kohelet. Okay, so the opening line we already went over. But the second line, who can read that second line for me?
Utter futility, said Kohelet. Utter futility.
Does anyone have another translation for that?
I remember the old one.
Yeah, what is the old one?
Vanity.
Vanity of vanities, says Kohelet. Vanity of vanities, all is vanity. Does anyone here have that translation in front of them? No, you all have a
the
newer
old one.
one. Because, of course, the word vanity now has a different connotation. It's related to vain, and et cetera, et cetera. But futility is probably a better way, better translation. Actually, Gordis points out that the first word, hevel, in Hebrew is hevel. Any of you remember anyone else or any earlier appearance? Actually, I think the black is better. Cain and Abel. Hevel is the name of Abel. And Gordis thinks that hevel, based on other uses in rabbinic literature, hevel is like a breath, a vapor, just a fleeting breath. So he actually, not in the text, but in the commentary, says it means vapor of vapors. Well, the book wouldn't have gone too far if that were the second line, and that's how it's translated, vapor of vapors. Vanity of vanities, or futility of futilities, says Kohelet. And now what I want you to do is turn to the back of the book. In other words, the end of the book. Turn to the end of the book. In Gordis's book, it's called the epilogue, actually, but this would be chapter 12, verse 8. Verse 8. Somebody like to read that verse?
Utter futility, said Kohelet. All is futile.
Okay. That's the end of Kohelet's words. Those are the last words of Kohelet, the author. Then let's read what follows. Please read from verse 9.
A further word, because Kohelet was asleep, he continued to instruct the people. He listened to and tested the soundness of many maxims. Kohelet sought to discover useless sayings and recorded genuinely truthful sayings. The sayings of the wise are like goats.
Goats. They prod you. The sayings of the wise are like goads. They prod, they push you, they challenge you.
Like nails fixed in prodding sticks. They were given by one shepherd. A further word against them, my son, be warned. The making of many books is without limit, and much study is a wearing of the flesh. The sum of the matter, when all is said and done, revere God and observe His commandments. And this applies to all mankind, that God will call every creature to account for everything unknown, be good or bad. The sum of the matter, when all is said and done, revere God and observe His commandments, for this applies to all mankind.
Yes, and that's actually a repeat of the penultimate line, because in Jewish tradition, when we read a book, or when we complete the reading of a biblical book, or even sometimes a chapter in a biblical book, and the last line is not too hopeful, we go back to the line before, because it's a nicer note on which to end the book. So here the penultimate line is repeated as the last line. But if you go to that first verse 9, you see it's somebody else writing, right? Not only was Kohelet a sage himself, but he also taught the people knowledge, weighing and searching, and fashioning many proverbs. So this is the editor writing, and then the editor says a couple of additional things. Kohelet tried to find attractive words and honestly to set down the truth. It's an eloquently written book, and that's the attractive words, and he was engaged in a search for the truth. And again, the editor is describing that. And I have a slightly different translation for the next line. I think, in Hebrew sometimes the word and, vo, can actually be translated differently. It can have different meanings. And sometimes it can mean but. However, and I think that's a sense of it here. The words of the wise are like goads. In other words, the words of the sages, they push us a little bit. They challenge us. But, not and, but, like well-fastened nails are the collected sayings coming from one source. The collected sayings of the tradition, they are like well-fastened nails, as opposed to a goad. Right? A goad is pushing you. What is it? And what do the nails do? They anchor you. They weigh you down. And he's saying that the sayings of the sages, they are what really anchor us. And then, by the way, Kohelet, you spent your time writing a book? Furthermore, my son, be warned, of making books there is no end. And much study is weary, makes the flesh weary. In sum, and in Hebrew that's sof davar, in conclusion, this is the conclusion, this is your takeaway from the book of Kohelet, says the editor. Having heard everything, fear God, keep God's commandments, for that is our whole purpose in life. I'm not sure how it's translated there in your translation. Could someone read that, just that one verse again?
The sum of the matter, when all is said and done, revere God and observe His commandments, for this applies to all mankind.
Good. Okay. Zeh kol ha'adam. I actually don't like that translation so much. Why do you think I don't like it?
It's gender specific.
Not Adam never. I'm not sure how it's translated, but Adam actually is a humanity, as opposed to Ish and Isha. Now the reason I don't like it is because Judaism never saw its commandments as applying to everybody, only to Israel. So that's why I don't think that's really a good translation. But Kizeh kol ha'adam, this is This is our whole purpose in life. This is what we are created for. This is what humanity is created for.
Is in the liturgy somewhere?
No, it isn't. This line, it is not, no. But maybe you've heard it, and of course there are many lines that speak about following the commandments and listening to the commandments.
It's the word revere God.
Revere God, well that also, that term is found many places. Yirat Hashem,
Yeah.
the fear of the Lord, or Yirat Elohim, the fear of the Lord. So anyway, this helped. But the Talmud itself conveys a tradition that is questioning as to whether the Book of Kohelet should have been included in the Bible. The Talmud has a discussion, and it refers to books that, quote, defile the hands. Metameh hayadayim. And it's a very technical law, and namely that if somebody touched certain biblical scrolls, then their hands would be, quote, defiled, and if they then touched the teruma, which would be the offerings given to the Kohanim, given to the priests. And if they then, with hands that they had used to touch one of these sacred books, touched the truma, it would become defiled and couldn't be used. So it's a very technical term, only dating to temple times, and it wouldn't be referring to picking up a book like this, but the scrolls. So only a real scroll, right? Only the scroll of a real biblical book could defile the hands. So the rabbis say Kohelet defiles the hands. So what do I read into that? That some people said maybe it doesn't defile the hands. Maybe it's not a proper book. But the Talmud rules that it is, and there it is. There it is. So when was that process completed? It probably was an organic process that took centuries. Scholars used to believe that it could be dated to a gathering, a synod in Yavne around the year 100 of the Common Era. And that's possible. But it gives us an idea of when the biblical books all came together. Now, I discovered something interesting in my own preparation for our class, which is the question of the order of the biblical books. The order. And I found that the order that we have in our Tanakhs is not is fairly recent in terms of the evidence that we have for it, dating back only maybe about 500-600 years to the first printing of Jewish Bibles. And before that, the ordering of these books was a little different. And we have manuscript evidence in earlier Bibles of different orderings of the books. But the ordering of the books that we have now, and I'm going to go over that, is the order in which they are traditionally read in the synagogue. So it is very synagogue-centered. So what I'd like us to find is what are called the 5 Megillot, the 5 scrolls. Can anyone read the order of the 5 scrolls that we have them here?
Song of Songs,
Good.
Ruth, Lamentations, Ecclesiastes, and Esther.
Okay, that's exactly the order in which they were read in the synagogue. The Song of Songs, Passover. Ruth, Shavuot. Lamentations, Tisha B'Av. Kohelet, Ecclesiastes, Sukkot, and Esther. The cycle of the Jewish year, of course, beginning when?
Lisa.
Passover, because the biblical year began in Nisan. The biblical year began in Nisan. The rabbinic year begins in Tishrei. Right? So we have actually two different New Years, and certainly there's a history and story about that. But the traditional order, the ordering of the books here is the order of the way they're read in the synagogue. So, but as I said, it's not the earlier, before that, manuscripts going back to about 1,000 of the Common Era. They have a different ordering of these biblical books. I'll stop here for some questions.
Well, how were they ordered before? When they were written, or?
No, I'm talking about the writings.
Yes, but
the
how were they
writings.
before? They must
I
have-
don't have it in front of me. It's a different order. It's a different order.
I was just wondering.
So some Ruth is actually placed differently. If you look at a Christian Bible, you're going to see a different order of the Hebrew Bible books, what they refer to as the Old Testament. You're going to see a different order, and that order actually is more reflective of the usage of the church. So the usage of the synagogue has had a real impact on the order of the Hebrew Bible, just as the church and its usage, religious usage of the Bible affects the ordering of those biblical books.
So I have a question about
Sure.
the editor of most two things that person songs. I'm trying to understand perhaps the alter meaning, the alter purpose of the
I don't think anyone's given a date of the redactor. The only thing is that it's somewhere between the date of the composition and the date that it's brought in, and I would think very early. I would think very early, because otherwise that's what helped in the books being accepted. So I think it was very early, and believe me, many people have read the whole book of Kohelet beginning to end and not noticed or not thought that maybe this is the work of two hands. You can read it and think it's just Kohelet at the end, say, by the way, you know, after all my exploration, the one thing that's really important, fear God and observe the commandments. You know, that you can read it. The clue to the critical reader is that, oh, it opens vanity of vanities, futility of futilities, and at the very end, right before those pious lines, is vanity of vanities, says Kohelet. But probably once you had that edition, it made the whole book, it gave it a whole different sense. And namely that this is Kohelet's conclusion. So I would say it probably was fairly soon after. Remember that whoever has written that is describing something about Kohelet, so they knew Kohelet. You know, he was a good teacher, he taught many people, etc., etc. So that, and he wrote other parables. So it's clear that this person is familiar with Kohelet's work. So let's say it was within the generation of Kohelet that this was added. But essentially, the book is Kohelet's work. Some people have thought that there are a number of rather pious statements or pious-looking statements in the book, and some people think that those were interpolations. Gordis believes that they're not. Gordis believes it's Kohelet himself, that Kohelet is quoting these earlier statements and then commenting on them. I want to say another thing about Kohelet and the books of the writings, etc. And you may, of course, be aware of this, noticed it before, or heard it before. They're very much books written by an individual. The I word, very important in Kohelet. For Rabbi's sermons who say, you know what was Kohelet's problem? He's just thinking of me. I. You'll find the word I, don't know, countless times in the book. That's really different from the prophets. It really distinguishes the writings, the Ketuvim, not all, but most of them, that they're very much, they have an individual stamp of an author. They make no claims as being the result of divine revelation. The Torah, of course, has such claims. The prophets, so saith the Lord. None of that here. None of that. It's a reflection of a great thinker. That's what we have here. Just think of some of the other books Proverbs. Esther is historical. Remember, God's name is not even found in the book of Esther. The Song of Songs, a collection of love poetry, of love poems and songs. All of these, all of this section of the Bible, very much is books written by an author reflecting that person's journey. And Job, of course, fits that category just perfectly. It's a prime example of that. So that's one of the things that distinguishes the writings. Now, any further thoughts even before we've gone into the book as to, other than Solomonic attribution, the religious statements, pious statements at the end, other reasons that this may have merited being included in the Bible?
I think one's reputation would impact the editors of any book, and especially something like this. And if Kohelet was a great teacher, was a great sage, if he had something important to say, then you include that.
Good. Anything else? How about something related to the themes of the book?
So I don't know. I suspect he talks about how fertility, vanity, fleeting aspect of life. Maybe this was an issue for the Jews was realized that needed to be addressed.
The very issues of everybody here?
Hear him. Would you repeat his question?
No, all I'm saying is that
You still
it
can't.
talks a lot about fertility and doubts and how quickly life passes, how short it is.
Nobody can hear.
Would you give him the mic, please? He
I
gets
don't think the microphone is on. It is? Am I the only one that can't hear?
No, you're not the only one.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
To the most. I don't know this for sure. All I'm suggesting is perhaps it's because the book talks about futility and doubts and the ethereal nature of life, that maybe these were concerns or feelings that Jews had at that point and needed to be addressed in some ways.
Any others?
What do you say?
Also that the earth endures, and what God made endures, and we are just passing.
I'm with you.
Our transience is
Okay, so you're saying some of the teachings in the book really are very important to be heard, and that's why the book was the permanence of the earth that God has created. Any other thoughts? Well, I'm going to suggest that the canonizers of the Bible felt that there needed to be a place for doubt and question in religion. You cannot have religion or faith without questions, without questioning, without doubt, without a bit of skepticism. Otherwise, this is in a sense a counterbalance to all kinds of statements where you affirm without question, I believe this, I believe that. Religious faith needs these questions. That's why it's there. That's why Job is there. Job is there because that's the world. The righteous suffer. And you cannot have a Bible that represents the wisdom of the ages, the statement of great faith in its entirety, by ignoring, if it would ignore this other side that really questions some of what religion is teaching us. So what I'm saying is the questioning is good. The questioning is good, and that's why the book is in the Bible. Because you need some of those questions, you need somebody who's a questioner. Otherwise, religious faith is it's untested, it's not challenged, and it's not really reflective of the world such as it is. So as I see it, the book of Kohelet is there to tell us that there is absolutely a place for questioning and doubt in our religious lives. I worry more, to tell you the truth, I'm speaking as a rabbi, I worry more about people who tell me, I have no questions. I remember I used to teach at the Jewish Theological Seminary, and I taught rabbinical students. And I started by teaching first-year rabbinical students a seminar. And the first year I taught, there was a major earthquake in San Francisco. I think this was 1989. And the students came in, and I said, do you have any questions, anything bothering you about the earthquake? He said, oh no, it doesn't bother us. We know the answers. We know the answers. God creates good. God creates evil. There's a place for it. We know the answers. I was really troubled. Not just about the earthquake. I was troubled by their response. They know all the answers. No, what I wanted to hear was, why does God create a world with earthquakes? Why does God create suffering? That's what I wanted them to, I didn't want them to tell me, no, we know the answers. That's why Kohelet is here. That's why it's in the Bible, to tell us this kind of questioning is legitimate. It's okay. It's one of the things that religion needs. Otherwise, we just become a bunch of cheerleaders. And that's not Judaism. Judaism is far deeper. It's far deeper than that. Okay, so I think with that, I'd like us to actually start to study the book. I think you've gotten, up there, but if there's any final questions before we start to look into the book. Okay. So we're going to go back to the beginning. We're going to go back to the beginning. I don't have your translation. I have Gordis's. Next time I'll bring yours as well, which is the JPS, Jewish Publication Society. There probably are not major differences, and if there are, I'll point them out and we'll maybe take a look. Does anyone have the Hebrew with them?
Yes.
Yeah.
Some of you do?
Yes.
Oh, you have the Hebrew?
Yeah.
Oh, it's on both sides. It's both Hebrew and English. Fantastic. Okay, great. Okay, so why don't we start? One of the things is that Gordis in his book, and I think this is probably going to be helpful to you, sees the book as a number of discourses. A number of different discourses. Now, they don't necessarily follow the Jewish, I shouldn't say Jewish, the traditional chapter division. Not necessarily. The chapter divisions of all the biblical books were actually written by Christians. Not by Jews. But Jews adopted them. They accepted them. So that's why in you look at a Christian Bible, a Jewish Bible, the chapter divisions are going to be almost alike. There are a couple of places where they differ. But the chapter divisions were written in the Middle Ages, and the Jewish community obviously accepted those chapter divisions, but the Hebrew Bible did not have such divisions. It had paragraphs. That's really what you have. Some of you who have read the Torah, when you go up to the Torah, you notice all the paragraph marks there. That's what the Jewish division was like. Okay, so let's look at the beginning. Maybe somebody would like to read the first lines, and I hope that we can reflect on what we're reading, that we can talk about what it means to us, because that also, I shouldn't say also, that is extremely important as we study the Bible. In other words, on one level, what is Kohelet saying? What is Kohelet saying? But on another level, what is it saying to me? And that's really making it alive for us. Now, one of the things that the rabbis did, and maybe next week I'll give you a couple of examples of that, is sometimes they take a verse out of its context. So you say, gee, that's not what Kohelet was saying, but that's the rabbis making meaning for themselves and for their communities, making meaning of these verses. So when we look at the Bible now, when we look at Kohelet, first we want to understand what is Kohelet saying, and then we want to say, what does this mean to me? Extremely important that we because that's the living Bible. The living Bible is what does it mean to me. So let's start. Somebody maybe in the first row who hasn't read yet.
The words of Kohelet, son of David, king of Jerusalem. Utter futility, said Kohelet. Utter futility. All is futile. What real value is there for a man in all the gains he makes beneath the sun? One generation goes, another comes, but the earth remains the same forever. The sun rises and the sun sets, and glides back to where it rises, southward blowing, turning northward. Ever turning blows the wind. On its rounds the wind returns. All streams flow into the sea, yet the sea is never full. To the place from which they flow, the streams flow back again. All such things are wearisome. No man can ever stay them. The eye never has enough of seeing, nor the ear enough of hearing. Only that shall happen which has happened. Only that occur which has occurred. There is nothing new beneath the sun. Sometimes there is a phenomenon of which they say, look, this one is new. It occurred long since in ages that went by before us. The earlier ones are not remembered. So too, those that will occur later will no more be remembered than those that will occur at the very end.
Thank you. We'll stop here. What do we get out of this opening reading chapter? What do we get out of it? What do we?
I'm just looking at it stylistically, and in that he asks a question at the very beginning when we're talking about questioning, and then lists those things that are not answers to the question, but rather support the thesis that there are questions and that we can't accept what we see now because that now is going to be the past someday. We can't see the future. And also some very good authors borrowed some of the words in here for the titles of their books.
Right, yes. Yeah, exactly.
So Hemingway here.
Right, this is really eloquent. And that's why they, and what they are doing also is taking verses out of context, right? Because when they take that, a few words as a title for a book, it has a totally different meaning but it came even though it came from Kohelet. But you're right. What profit does man? And then he doesn't really give the answer. He's building a thesis. Well, Gordis calls this chapter on the monotony of nature. That's what he calls this, on the monotony of nature. Write that down. What he's saying is that all these phenomena just repeat themselves, right? You think there's nothing new under the sun, right? Ein chadash tachat hashemesh, that's it. Some of you know that became a very famous Hebrew saying. Many Hebrew sayings come from the book of Kohelet. They enter the everyday language. I saw a couple of hands.
We're living in one large groundhog day.
Yeah, one large groundhog day. Every February 2nd, he comes out and looks at his shadow and he runs away. Any other comments? Please.
As I was reading it, it was like a peacefulness came over me because I knew it was going to happen again. And it'll keep going.
Yeah, that on one level that's reassuring, isn't it? Isn't it? This
But
that
it's paralyzing too.
it could
It's paralyzing.
Paralyzing.
I can't do anything about it. I'm paralyzed.
yeah.
I can't change anything.
Yeah. Of course, we nowadays know that actually the world is changing, right? What we're doing is affecting things, and so it's not as simple as what Kohelet is saying. Please.
Well, it seems to say that there's so much going on around us, difficulty comprehending it. Maybe by the time we're all done, we may remember some. That seems to be the message of the other.
Yeah. Too much to be comprehended.
The end of the moral rather than the end of the
Yes. Thank you.
It seems as though we're living in a circular existence rather than a linear existence.
Circular existence rather than a linear existence. Everything's just going round and round, right? What are the shape of our collars on the high holidays? They're round, right? There's a reason that they're round. The year is going round and round, the cycle of time, etc., etc. We're conscious of that as opposed to the linearity, just going forward. Please.
On a more positive note, Israel just announced this morning it's made some initial progress in stem cell research. They're about to undergo some kind of drug that they're formulating that they're going to market.
So, yesh chadash tachat hashamesh. There are new things, right? There are new things under the sun.
Maybe it was there, we just didn't discover it. It's not new, it's there, it's our job to discover it.
What is it, an optimist or a pessimist more likely to be the one who says there's nothing new under the sun? A pessimist. See, that's Kohelet. There's nothing new under the sun. Most of us, when we go out into nature, we think of, look, even the liturgist, when the Shachrit service, many of you are familiar with the lines after the Baruch Hu, where we speak of God renewing creation every day. Right? You go out into the sun and you see the sun rising in the morning, and a religious person sees wonder in that. Just think of Abraham Joshua Heschel, seeing wonder in the renewal of nature. And Kohelet saw the same sunrise yesterday. So this is the voice of pessimists. Please.
It's almost the existential question. So this cycle goes on, it's a generation before me, and a generation after. And my life is fine. What does this mean for me?
Well, that's in a sense, this adds to his questions. Even if he doesn't state it. He's not going to state every question. You know, the Bible doesn't state everything out directly for us because it's going to be suggestive. So I think then that's Kohelet. This is, you know, item number 1 that he's filing, the monotony of nature. And where does that leave me? Please.
Why can't it have a more optimistic? And what I mean by that,
Please,
you know, if the suggestion that there's so much out there, there's so much wealth, so much knowledge, we can't comprehend it. And it talks about the circularity of this all continues. And the end, if it's not the end of the day, it's all right. And then beyond that, there's someone else who can pick up. The lady in the back of the room is supposed to extend something. There's nothing new about that. We don't know how to do it. We don't know how to apply it. We don't know the whole function. But it's there. And I sort of got that message from this, that there's so much to comprehend, and it keeps going. We don't keep going. That's the end. But so I didn't view it as anything negative. I thought it's all there. It's positive.
Okay, well, I think to me it seems a little more pessimistic, but we all read it in our own way. That's fine.
I agree with Howie, because if you feel that everything will go on even after you're gone, then you have a hope for the future, your children.
The fact that everything keeps going is a reassuring sign.
Yes.
That's fine.
Comfort.
I hear what you're hearing, that it's shooting somebody down, like, you know, your arrogance to think that you've done something fabulous. It's been here before, big deal. Everything seems to be diminished to plain sameness, and that there's no miraculous discovery. You lost that feeling of excitement.
Maybe he had a boring life.
No, he did not have a boring life. His life
Maybe
is
some
not boring.
earthquake, some laughs, maybe.
I don't think he had a boring life, but you know, there are people who have exciting lives who think they're boring. And there are people who have less dramatically exciting lives who are very pleased with their lives and don't find them boring at all. Okay, we'll just file this up there, and then again, I hope you'll go back to it. Let's continue with the next section, which will take us all the way from verse 12 in chapter 1 to verse 26 in chapter 2. Maybe somebody from the second row will read this part and I'll divide it.
Kohelet was king in Jerusalem over Israel.
Does it say Kohelet was king?
Yeah.
Is there no I in there?
Hi.
Oh, yes, there's an I.
yes.
Yeah. I Kohelet.
Oh.
Yeah, I Kohelet. Yeah. I want to make sure that it was in there. That's the I word. And that's the I word that's in Kohelet. First, okay, thank you. Please continue.
I, Kohelet, was king in Jerusalem over Israel. I set my mind to study and to probe with wisdom all that happens under the sun. An unhappy business that, which God gave men to be concerned with. I observed all the happenings beneath the sun, and I found that all is futile and pursuit of wind. A twisted thing that cannot be made straight, a lack that cannot be made good. I said to myself, here I have grown richer and wiser than any that ruled before me over Jerusalem, and my mind has zealously absorbed wisdom and learning. And so I set my mind to appraise wisdom and to appraise madness and folly. And I learned that this too was pursuit of wind. For as wisdom grows, vexation grows. To increase learning is to increase heartache.
Okay, let's stop there. What are the key words in this little section? Yeah. Wisdom. Absolutely, wisdom here. I have increased my wisdom. He's trying to go and search through his wisdom all that happens beneath the sky. And conclusion, it's all vanity or futility, I imagine, as you have it translated, and a chasing of wind. Ever try to chase a wind? You're never going to get too far. A crookedness not to be straightened, a void not to be filled. And he says, again, the last slide here is what also became a very famous Hebrew expression. Yosif da'at, Yosif machov. The more knowledge, the more pain. More worry. Right? If you know a lot, if you know too much about certain things, you're just going to worry more. Ignorance is bliss. Exactly. And so this is Kohelet with all his wisdom. He's saying, what did I get from it? Just more worries. That's Kohelet. Let's continue.
I have a question to the word
Please.
Holelut. I mean, here the translation.
Re'ut?
Holelut.
Which line, please?
No, the same 17, you know.
Re'ut ruach is from like brokenness.
So he said the praise madness, right? Holelut.
Sichlut, holelut. Oh yes, madness, holelut.
But today we use the word as like crazy,
like Meshuggah, wild,
a lot of parties and drinking and not really madness.
Yeah, well that's what he's saying. Vida'at, holelut. He says that to me, this knowledge is just it's madness. I think it's a sense of madness. Holelut.
Oh, not knowing life of parties and drinking?
No, I don't think it, but that's a more modern, contemporary meaning of it, you know. Holelut, but it's a sense of madness. That knowledge, what is knowledge? It's madness. That's how you have to read it. Ladat chokhmah, vidat holelut. It's just all madness. Any other? Okay, let's pick up from chapter 2, verse 1. Someone else in the second row?
I said to myself, come, I will treat you to merriment. Taste mirth. That too I found was futile. Of revelry I said, it's mad. Of merriment, what good is that? I ventured to tempt my flesh with wine and to grasp folly, while letting my mind direct wisdom to the end that I might learn which of the two was better for men to practice in their few days of life under heaven. Maybe that's how they're going into those wild parties.
Now the parties, yes. Now he's going to try to see, maybe the answer is to go and distract myself and really have a blast.
I multiplied my possessions. I built myself houses and I planted vineyards. I laid out gardens and groves in which I planted every kind of fruit tree. I constructed pools of water, enough to irrigate a forest shooting up with trees. I bought male and female slaves, and I acquired stewards. I also acquired more cattle, both herds and flocks, than all who were before me in Jerusalem. I further amassed silver and gold and treasures of kings and provinces, and I got myself male and female singers, as well as the luxuries of commoners, coffers and coffers. Thus I gained more wealth than anyone before me in Jerusalem. In addition, my wisdom remained with me. I withheld from my eyes nothing they asked for, and denied myself no enjoyment. Rather, I got enjoyment out of all my wealth, and that was all I got out of my wealth. Then my thoughts turned to all the fortune my hands had built up, to the wealth I had acquired in one, and oh, it was all futile in pursuit of wind. There was no real value under the sun. For what will the man be like who will succeed the one who was ruling over what was built up long ago? My thoughts also turned to appraising wisdom and madness and folly. I found that wisdom is superior to folly, as light is superior to darkness. A wise man has his eyes in his head, whereas a fool walks in darkness. But I also realize that the same fate awaits them both. So I reflected, the fate of the fool is also destined for me. To what advantage then have I been wise? And I came to the conclusion that that too is futile, because the wise man, just like the fool, is not remembered forever. For as the succeeding days go by, both are forgotten. Alas, the wise man dies, just like the fool.
So it's about himself or about King Solomon?
I'm sorry.
This is about himself or about King Solomon?
Well, this is, this chapter, Gordis calls it the twin experiment. He himself, the twin experiment. He himself is experimenting to see the meaning of wisdom and merriment. And so first he tries out wisdom, and he sees that wisdom has brought him only increased vexation and worry and pain. And then he tries out merriment, and you see he has access to everything. He's a very wealthy man, as it's described. And he thought that that would buy him something. But then he realized it did not. So that's the twin experiment. Now he says, I've done this in wisdom. I think what he's saying is he kept his thinking cap on. In other words, when he indulged in all these extravagances, he still was thinking. He was analyzing what was taking place. And that's the sense of the chokhmah, the wisdom that we read about in this second part. And again, he says he doesn't find any real permanent fulfillment in this. Please.
Is he saying that if you have wisdom, you shouldn't impart it to the next generation, or am I misinterpreting?
No, he doesn't. He would not say that, but he almost doesn't seem that interested in it, at least so far. He doesn't seem that interested in it because he's saying, you know, what happens with all your wisdom after you go? Now, we understand what happens. It's passed on to others, right? That's very powerful. The teachings of the masters are passed down from generation to generation. Kohelet doesn't seem to see that. He doesn't seem to see it.
Yeah, but it doesn't say he didn't. It does or does not say he didn't try that. Maybe he's not aware of that possibility. I don't know.
Well, the concluding verses, if you remember, say that Kohelet did teach people, and he formulated many sayings, and he goaded others, but somehow he is not impressed. You know, we're learning a lot about this man, this Kohelet, and I think again that he's a very unhappy person.
Well, while it is true that we all are born and we all die, whether we are wise or fools, but he makes no mention of any enjoyment or doing good in between those two events.
And when he does make mention of that, he sees that, the deeds are forgotten. He's going to speak later on about the evil people. They die and they're eulogized in the public square. And people kind of forget the bad things that they've done. So, I almost think that when we suggest that for the next week, on your own, you read further, that you actually, or you could go back and write your own reflections as to what Kohelet has said. Because you're all pointing to other things that, why didn't he see that? And he doesn't. He doesn't because his perspective is different, and it's the book very much, I would imagine if somebody would do a psychological study of Kohelet, you would say that this was a man who was very, very unhappy.
He speaks about acquiring all these things herds and flocks and male and female slaves and trees and scrolls and so on, but never does he talk about his goals. Never talks about why he's doing this. What is the reason for my amassing this church? And if I do amass it, then I reach my goal.
Right, that's good. The goal just seems to be to amass, right? To amass these many things, which I think very often we notice that people who get caught up in this, that's exactly what they're doing. They're amassing all kinds of objects, material goods, and they may not really even ask themselves what they're doing it for.
Or was his goal to see if that would make a difference? To amass all this and see it, perhaps he, thought that, things were better because I have all this.
Most people who amass a lot of goods think that they'll bring them happiness, right? That's, the gadgetry, all the things that people want, and the beautiful homes or clothing, they think it will make them happy. That's why they do it, and he's saying it didn't.
Yeah, no matter what you have, if you're well and living, it's good. But in the end, if you wind up in a bed of pain, and you're in a hospital room alone, perhaps, or in your home alone for a moment, pain, you die alone. And I could see these thoughts going through, what good did it do me to get everything, to have a wonderful life, to have all these grandchildren, they're not here right now, and it doesn't really help me at all. And so I could see this being the thoughts of a person at the very end of life.
Okay, they're fitting in with the Midrash. This is the words of an older person. And later on, towards the very end, there's a very, very powerful description of old age. So it does seem that Kohelet has lived his life. There's no reference to children. And Agordas suggests that Kohelet was a bachelor, that he never had a family. And which, of course, could be help explain some of this depression towards old age. Please.
I think of three different common thoughts that are in popular culture. King Midas, no matter how much.
I'm sorry?
King Midas, when he touched him to gold, it didn't make him happy. Is that all there is? Is that all there is? And what's it all about, Elfie? I mean, it's very popular to define the emptiness that comes from acquiring. It's what fulfills one in life. It's a popular thing. And so there's nothing new under the sun. It's been done before.
Exactly. It's been done before. Kohelet described it. And remember that those of us who don't have these material goods are very often people who don't think. They think that if they had them, then they would find happiness. It only takes somebody who has had them who can say, it didn't do it for me.
Sharon, I agree with you, but what I'm going to say is richer or poorer, it's good to have money.
Yeah.
Well, and there are people that aren't. I mean, you just can't say, I've got all the money and everything in the world and I'm miserable. I mean, you just can't generalize like that. There are people actually, and there are people who died, who have not had children, who have had full lives. I mean, you're putting values on people that just isn't true of the, you can't say it of a whole population.
Thank you. I didn't mean to, so thank you. Yeah.
The other thing, we're talking a lot about the acquisition of material wealth and that being something we can disdain, because what good is it? He's also indicating that you could think you know everything, or you can acquire wisdom, so what? And for those who are always seeking to learn more, if you stop and say, so what? That's as futile as saying, now that I've got all this stuff, so what? I think as if it were a twin experiment, the wisdom and the material, I think we have to put those on an equal level as well, and not just go after people who acquire goods.
Yes, he's questioning both.
So, to me, this is not a view from 30,000 feet looking at the whole world. This is a very personal,
yes,
reflective view. So it's not what this means from generation to generation. It's, I've done all these things. I've tried to be wise. I've tried to find enjoyment. I've tried all these paths. And what is the meaning to me? What are the things that give meaning to me other than just my existence in life? So that's the way I think. It's like the existential literature from 150 years ago. It's the same question.
Right. It's Kohelet's journey, ultimately. This is Kohelet's journey. His conclusions may not be our conclusions, but they are his journey. But as we read them, we're inevitably going to be reflecting from our situation and saying, no, we don't agree with him here, we agree, or we do agree with him here. So I think that's why I say there are two levels. One is, what is Kohelet saying? And then another is, how do we relate to it? And then another would be, what kind of meaning we can take from this. So another...
Is this the ultimate question? What is the meaning of life?
Yeah. What is the meaning of life?
Seems like that's what he's asking. As Phyllis said in the end, looking back on what he's done, what he hasn't done. Well, not what he hasn't done, but what is the meaning of life?
Right, and that question is the most important question. And actually, the question is far more important than the answer. And that's our question, too, and that's why I think the book can speak to us, because many of us are engaged in the same quest. What is the meaning of life? Or what meaning can I find in life? Or what meaning can I find in my life? And that question of meaning, that's what Kohelet is addressing from his standpoint. So the question itself is, that we're coming up with different thoughts or comments as to what you said. That's good, because we are also engaged in that quest. And that's when, right, the words of the wiser goes. They prod you. They prod you to think of these things, whether your answer is going to be Kohelet's answer or not. Why don't we, this is one of the longest sections in here. And what verse do we end? I'm not sure were we at about 14? 17. Otherwise, somebody can pick up from there. We'll finish to 26.
And so I loathed life, for I was distressed by all that goes on under the sun, because everything is futile in pursuit of wind. So too I loathe all the wealth that I was gaining under the sun, for I shall leave it to the man who will succeed me, and who knows whether he will be wise or foolish, and he will control all the wealth that I gained by toil and wisdom under the sun. That too is futile. And so I came to view with despair all the gains I have made under the sun. For sometimes a person whose fortune was made with wisdom, knowledge, and skill must hand it on to the portion of somebody who did not toil for it. That too is futile, and a great evil. For what does a man get for all the toiling and worrying he does under the sun? All his days, his thoughts are grief and heartache, and even at night his mind has no respite. That too is futile. There is nothing worthwhile for a man but to eat and drink and afford himself enjoyment with his needs. And even that, I noted, comes from God. For who eats and who enjoys but myself? To the man, namely, who pleases him, he has given the wisdom and shrewdness to enjoy himself, and to him who displeases, he has given the urge to gather and amass only for handing on to one who is pleasing to God. That too is futile in pursuit of wind.
Okay, this last little section is very important, and it's one of the themes of the book. Namely, there is no greater good than to eat and drink and find joy in your work. This is cited by Kohelet at a number of times. And It's the reason that Kohelet is read on Sukkot. Sukkot in the Bible is called the season of our rejoicing. Zeman Simchatenu. Zeman Simchatenu, the season or the time of our rejoicing. The reason that it's called that is that more places in the Torah does it say rejoice with Sukkot than with any other holidays. Now, why would it say rejoice more with Sukkot? It's the holiday of the harvest. In gathering, you've brought in a harvest, hopefully a very successful one, a good one. Rejoice in the harvest. So, in reference to Sukkot, especially in Deuteronomy, it speaks about joy. V'hayita ach sameach. You shall be happy on Sukkot. So, in the Kiddush and other places in the liturgy, we say Chag HaSukkot hazeh, this holiday of Sukkot, Zeman Simchatenu, the season of our rejoicing, just as Passover is the season of our liberation, Zman Perutenu. Shavuot is a season or the time we celebrate the giving of the Torah, Zman Matan Toratenu. This is Zman Simchatenu. One of the early Jewish commentaries on Kohelet says the reason it's read on Sukkot is because Kohelet speaks of the importance of joy, Simcha. So he's saying, and this line in various formulations will come up in a number of places. You know, with bottom line, try to enjoy life. That's what he said. Try to enjoy life. We'll see it again in that verse. And not only is that, he sees that as a gift from God. There's no greater joy. Ein tov ba'adam sheyochal v'shata v'her'ad nafsho tov ba'amalo. Gam ze ra'iti ani ki miyat ha'elohim hi. He said, I see this as from the hand of God. In other words, that's really a blessing in life. If you can find joy in these pleasures of life. So it's not the madness, the mad acquisition, you know, that he describes before, but just seek the joys of life, and that's his conclusion. And we're going to see that he says that towards the end of the book, before the religious edition that was added to. And so to the person that God favors, you know, does your translation say the man, or to of the man that God favors? What does your translation have? Man. Okay, the Hebrew is totally gender neutral. Adam. To the human, to the person that God favors, God has given wisdom and knowledge, v'simcha, and joy. And then v'lachote, and is it translated in your book as to the sinner? Lachote. How is it translated there? The one who displeases God? Okay, well the Hebrew word is lachote.
This translation is sinner.
Yeah, chote, sinner, and I'm putting it in quotation marks because Bible commentaries, the modern Bible commentators explain that the original word, meaning of the word hate, which we translate as sin, meant missing the mark. It referred to somebody who was an archer who was shooting an arrow and it misses the target. And that's the origin of that word chote. sin, you know, sounds very, very negative, but if we say the one who misses the mark, but the one who misses the mark, then that person God gives the task of gathering and amassing, only to hand it over to somebody else who is pleasing to God. So I think he's recognizing here that God has a role, that this joy is a gift of God. It doesn't say it's a reward for anything, right? It doesn't say it's a reward for doing the mitzvot. You don't find that here. This is not Deuteronomy. So you don't find that. But rather, this is a gift from God. To be able to enjoy what you have, as opposed to amass and not have it, which he recognizes. We have a couple of more minutes maybe to do that very, very famous reading. Chapter 3, the first 9 verses. Who would like to read that?
He said the last verse, the sinner collects and collects and collects. At the end, he gave it to the guy to do the good, right? That's what he says. So there is kind of reward.
Yeah.
There is a reward to the guy, to the man that pleased God.
Yeah, somebody else will get it. To someone who does please God is going to get it and enjoy it. Yeah. But because by what? Hopefully. Yeah, but I think he's saying better that you should enjoy it, right? And that's what he's saying. Better that you should enjoy it than somebody else. But somebody else will, and if you don't. So why don't we read the first 9 verses of chapter 9? Probably the most famous verses of Kohelet.
And this is based on a song called Turn, Turn.
The song comes from here. The song comes from here.
It's very famous.
Yes. It comes. That song comes from here.
Right.
For everything there is a season. This is the source of it.
It has a beautiful message.
Yes, it does. Why don't we? Maybe you'd like to read that for us.
Okay. A season is set for everything, a time for every experience under heaven, a time for being born and a time for dying, a time for planting and a time for uprooting and planted, a time for slaying and a time for healing, a time for tearing down and a time for building up, a time for weeping and a time for laughing, a time for wailing and a time for dancing, a time for throwing stones and a time for gathering stones, a time for embracing and a time for shunning embraces, a time for seeking and a time for losing, a time for keeping and a time for discarding, a time for ripping and a time for sewing, a time for silence and a time for speaking, a time for loving and a time for hating, a time for war and a time for peace. What value then can the man of affairs get from what he earns? I have observed.
Let's just stop there.
Okay.
Let's stop there. Because that is Kohelet's twist here. You see, most of us, we look at this chapter and we see it standing on its own. But Kohelet, at the end, is kind of saying, well, everything has a time, so what? And there's that cynical line that's coming in here. That what?
What can he get from it?
Exactly. What can I get from all this? If there's a time for everything, then what's the significance of this moment? It will pass. It's really, but it's really negative. But I don't think that's how we understand this passage. We understand this passage saying many other things. It's a very suggestive passage. Very suggestive.
Is it not a repetition of chapter 119? There's nothing new beneath the sun.
Well, that's exactly that last line. On the other hand, this is a very powerful reading. On occasion, I'll read it when I'm officiating at a funeral, but it can set a mood, and also it's telling us that if now is the time to cry, there's also going to be a time to heal. So it's, this is part of God's, the way God created the world, that there is a time to die, and there is a time to be born, there is a time to rejoice. So all those things are suggested by this. Anything else that you?
This is all stuff that's within our own control. This is not God moving the heavens and earth. This is us tearing down, building up, wailing, throwing stones. This is man's work in the world. This is not saying God is in control, maybe God is in control of the times. But it seems to me that this is not God causing earthquakes and causing the rain to fall. This is what we do.
However, the first one, a time to be born and a time to die, that's totally out of our control.
But everything else.
Not necessarily, of course. Yeah, but ultimately, it's, of course that humans have a great role, but
This section is a very realistic description of life.
Yes.
A realistic description, yes. There's a time for everything.
So how will you explain verse 12 and 13? In this chapter, verse 12 and 13, positive description.
We'll get to that. I don't want to do that. I want to I want to stop on time, but that's part of his conclusion of these first verses. He's going to reflect on it, and we'll see. That's his commentary, so to speak, on this beautiful chapter, which is his words, which have become extremely famous and used all the time. And that was a very famous and beautiful piece of music. Was it Simon and Garfunkel, I believe?
It's beautiful. For every season, turn.
Peter, Paul, and Mary originally, and probably they would have gotten it.
And we could share that with our younger generations, with our children.
Yeah. Okay, we'll stop here, and next week we'll continue. But what I'd like to invite some of you to do,
They know better.
Don't worry if you don't.
Unfortunately.
You can't do, but maybe some of you could take a reading from Kohelet and just write a little reflection on it, based on that, on any section, either from what we read today or what we're going to do next week. And I'm also going to bring in a couple of examples of how the rabbis, or what the rabbis did with these verses, because very often what the rabbis did is they turned the verses on their head.
Right.
A verse that seemed to be very questioning and doubtful, they're going to come up with their own interpretation of that verse. I'm going to bring some of that in next week as well, but I want to see so again, we're talking several levels. What is Kohelet saying? What is the living Torah? What does it mean, or what can it mean for us in our lives? I want to wish you all a Chag Sameach.
Yeah, and to this we say Chag Sukkot Sameach.
Chag Sukkot Sameach. Okay, Chag Sameach.